The storm did not arrive like ordinary storms. It crept in like something alive, breathing through the trees. The sky twisted into a sick shade of green, and the wind carried whispers that no one dared to understand. Deep within the plantation house, a woman screamed as if something inside her refused to be born. Lightning struck so close it rattled the bones of the old wooden walls. The servants gathered in the hallway, clutching their rosaries and muttering prayers under trembling breath. No one wanted to enter the room, but no one dared to leave either. The midwife had arrived hours earlier, her face pale the moment she stepped onto the land. She kept glancing toward the fields, as if expecting something to crawl out from the soil. When she finally locked herself inside the bedroom, she warned them not to open the door, no matter what they heard. Inside, the mother's screams turned into something unnatural, something layered with another voice beneath it. The sound echoed through the halls, rising and falling like a chant. It made the servants press their hands against their ears, yet they could not block it out. The candles in the hallway flickered violently, though no wind passed through. One by one, the flames stretched sideways, pointing toward the bedroom door. Then, in unison, they extinguished themselves, plunging everything into suffocating darkness. A sudden silence swallowed the house, thick and unnatural. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, as if the world itself held its breath. For a moment, there was nothing, no screams, no thunder, no life. Then came the sound of a child crying. It was soft at first, almost fragile, but it carried through every corner of the plantation. The servants froze, staring at the closed door with wide, terrified eyes. Minutes passed before anyone dared to move. One of the older servants slowly reached for the door handle, her hand shaking uncontrollably. She whispered a prayer as she pushed it open, expecting to see the midwife and the exhausted mother. The room was colder than the night outside, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. The mother lay silent on the bed, her eyes open but empty, as if something had been taken from her. There was no sign of the midwife anywhere. The child lay beside her, wrapped in blood-stained cloth, staring at the ceiling without blinking. His crying had stopped the moment the door opened. As the servant stepped closer, she noticed something that made her heart nearly stop. The baby was smiling. Outside, the storm returned with violent fury, shaking the plantation to its core. The wind howled like something enraged, circling the house again and again. Deep beneath the floorboards, something shifted, as if it had been waiting for this very moment to awaken. The whispers began before dawn, slipping through the fields like breath against the skin. They spoke softly at first, curling around names that only the workers would recognize. By sunrise, no one could pretend the plantation was quiet anymore. A young field hand was the first to run back, screaming from the crops. He claimed something had called him from the far rows, using his mother's voice. When the others checked, they found no one there, only the corn swaying, though the air was still. The overseer dismissed it as fear brought on by the storm. He forced the workers back into the fields, threatening punishment if they refused. But every step they took felt heavier, as if the soil resisted their presence. Strange patterns began appearing across the land, etched into the dirt overnight. The lines twisted into shapes no one could understand, yet everyone felt something wrong about them. Some swore the marks shifted when no one was looking directly at them. By midday, the animals started behaving in ways that made the workers uneasy. Horses refused to move forward, digging their hooves into the ground as if they sensed danger ahead. Even the dogs whimpered and hid beneath the porches, refusing to face the open fields. Inside the house, the child never cried again. He lay in silence, watching everything with wide, unblinking eyes. The servants avoided looking at him, feeling as though he understood far more than a newborn should. The mother had not spoken since the night of the birth. She stared blankly at the walls, her lips occasionally twitching, as if forming words she could not release. Whenever the child was brought near, her breathing quickened in quiet panic. That evening, one of the oldest workers claimed he heard footsteps behind him while harvesting. He turned, expecting to see someone approaching, but found only an empty stretch of land. Then, just as he faced forward again, something whispered directly into his ear. He dropped his tools and fled, refusing to return no matter the threats. He spoke of something standing just beyond sight, following each worker as they moved. Something patient, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The crops began to rot that very night, black veins spreading through the leaves like infection. The smell of decay filled the air, thick and suffocating. By morning, entire sections of the field had withered into lifeless husks. Fear settled into the bones of everyone on the plantation. They stopped speaking loudly, afraid their voices might attract whatever lingered in the fields. Even the overseer's authority began to crumble under the weight of something unseen. As the sun set once more, the whispers returned, louder than before. This time, they did not stay in the fields. They crept toward the house, gathering at the walls, as if drawn to the child who watched silently from within. It began with a mark that had not been there the night before. One of the servants noticed it while changing the child's cloth, her hands freezing mid-motion. A thin, dark symbol curled across his chest, as if it had been drawn from beneath his skin. She called for the others, her voice shaking as fear tightened around her throat. They gathered cautiously, forming a circle around the child without stepping too close. No one dared to touch the mark, yet none of them could look away. The symbol seemed alive in a way they could not explain. Its lines were too precise, too deliberate, forming patterns that hurt the eyes if stared at too long. Some swore it shifted slightly, as if breathing with the child's silent chest. When the overseer was summoned, he tried to dismiss it as a birthmark. His voice lacked conviction, cracking as he forced the words out. The moment his eyes lingered on the symbol, he stepped back without realizing it. The child remained unnaturally calm, his gaze drifting from face to face. He did not cry, did not move, only watched with an eerie awareness. It felt as though he recognized their fear and quietly fed on it. That same day, the oldest servant locked herself in her quarters. She refused to eat, refused to speak, and refused to come out when called. Only when night fell did she finally open the door, her expression hollow and defeated. She gathered the remaining workers in the dim light of the hallway. Her voice trembled as she spoke of something buried deep within the plantation's past, a story older than any of them, one that had been deliberately forgotten. She described a time when the land did not belong to any plantation. It was a place avoided by locals, whispered about in fearful tones. They believed something ancient slept beneath the soil, something that answered only to blood and ritual. Years ago, men had come seeking power, ignoring the warnings tied to the land. They carved symbols into the earth, not unlike the one now burned into the child's flesh. They thought they could control whatever answered their call, but something had gone terribly wrong. The ritual was never completed, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever they had awakened did not return to where it came from. Instead, it lingered, bound to the land, waiting for a vessel strong enough to contain it. Silence fell over the group as her words settled into their minds. Each of them understood the implication without needing it spoken aloud. The symbol on the child was not a mark of coincidence, but a sign of something chosen. From down the hall, a faint sound echoed through the darkness. It was not quite a cry, not quite a laugh, but something disturbingly in between. As they turned toward the sound, they realized it was coming from the child's room. The truth did not come all at once. It clawed its way out in fragments. The old servant led them beneath the house, her lantern trembling as much as her hands. What they were about to see, she warned, was never meant to be found again. The cellar door had not been opened in decades. It resisted at first, groaning like something alive as they forced it inward. A cold, damp breath escaped from below, carrying the scent of rot and something far older. The stairs creaked under their weight as they descended into darkness. The air grew heavier with each step, pressing against their lungs like invisible hands. No one spoke, as if sound itself might awaken whatever slept beneath them. At the bottom, the lantern light revealed walls carved with symbols. They stretched across the stone in endless patterns, twisting into shapes that made the eyes ache. Some were identical to the mark on the child, etched deeper with desperation. The overseer tried to remain composed, though sweat clung to his skin. He insisted these were nothing more than remnants of old superstition, but his voice echoed too loudly, betraying the fear he could no longer hide. In the center of the chamber lay a circle carved into the ground. Its edges were stained dark, uneven as though soaked in over time. Even without understanding, they knew it had been made for something terrible. The old servant stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the circle. She spoke of nights when the earth itself seemed to breathe. Voices once rose from beneath the soil, calling to those who listened. Those who lived here had not been alone. The original owners had grown obsessed with something unseen. They believed the land held a presence that could grant power beyond human limits. All it required was a vessel strong enough to carry it into the world. The ritual had demanded blood, more than anyone was willing to give. When it failed, those involved began to vanish one by one. The survivors sealed the chamber and abandoned the truth, but the land had never forgotten. a low sound began to hum through the walls, faint but unmistakable. It vibrated beneath their feet like a distant heartbeat. The lantern flame flickered violently, casting shadows that moved without reason. Above them, something heavy shifted within the house. Slow footsteps echoed through the ceiling. They realized the child was no longer lying quietly in his room. The night returned with suffocating stillness. No wind touched the trees, and no insects dared to sing. The plantation stood waiting for something it could no longer resist. Inside the house, the child was gone. The bed lay empty, the cloth discarded. A trail of small, dark footprints led away from the room. The servants followed, their lanterns trembling in their grip. Each step felt colder than the last. A low hum rose again, pulsing through the walls like a living thing. One servant called out, her voice cracking in fear. Something answered her from the darkness. It spoke in her own voice. She screamed and collapsed as the echo repeated endlessly. The others dragged her back in terror. The cellar door stood open below. A sickly glow seeped upward from the chamber. The hum pulled them downward once more. They descended in dread as the symbols began to glow. The carved circle pulsed like a heart, and within it stood the child. He faced away, completely still. The symbol on his chest burned brighter than before. The air around him warped unnaturally. A worker whispered his name. The child's head tilted at an impossible angle. Then he turned. His eyes were completely black. When he opened his mouth, voices poured out in chorus. The chamber trembled violently. The ground split with a cracking sound. Dust rained from above as the walls shook. The circle burned with blinding light. The child's shadow stretched impossibly across the chamber. The voices layered over each other in a language unknown. Each word pressed against the mind. One worker collapsed, bleeding from his ears. The overseer charged forward in desperation. The moment he entered the circle, he was thrown back lifeless. The chamber began to collapse around them. The earth bulged as something massive pushed from below. The glow spread like infection. The old servant stepped forward, whispering the truth. The ritual had never ended. The child was its completion. She fell to her knees and began to pray. The voices twisted her words into mockery. The child stared at her in silence. A deep sound rose from beneath the earth. Then the ground ruptured open. Something black and shifting emerged. It moved like a living shadow, consuming light itself. The chamber filled with its presence. The old servant screamed as it reached for her. The remaining workers fled in terror. Behind them, something ancient roared. By morning, the plantation stood silent once more.